Okay, let's actually make something. So I'm going to start off with Vox Sculpting, and I'm going to create a default box or cube. But I'm going to rescale it so it's more of a sort of vertical, tall kind of cube. I'm going to apply it. Now I'm going to sort of create several more. I'm going to overlap them, and I'm going to apply them. And this is going to sort of Boolean them together. Now, most of the time, you probably think of Booleans as in things being used to cut into other things, but Booleans are also adding things as well. The great thing about this in 3D Coat is that each time I add a cube or a kind of a box, and I can rotate it as well, it will add it to this existing object, and you can't see it at the moment, but there will actually be a kind of lovely little sort of beveled seam between each kind of each box as I add it to the sort of the overall kind of shape. So what I'm trying to do here is just build up a kind of base shape that my rocky kind of, it's going to be a kind of like, I don't know, vaguely fantasy, rocky outcrop detail type of thing. Actually, I'm sort of in some ways creating a kit bash sort of piece so that eventually when it's textured and put into something like Blender, who am I kidding? Something like Blender, definitely Blender. I mean, but you could obviously put this into Maya or even 3D Studio Max if you wanted to. But I'm kind of going to create something like that. Anyway, so now I'm switching to Cutoff Tool. Now that I've created my base kind of shape, I'm changing the shade there as well, just so that I can sort of see the details a bit better. I'm going to resample it as well here. And I'm going to change that. So, well, basically I'm going to change it so I've got a bit more resolution to play with, you know, I don't know, almost 2 million kind of polygons. It just means I'll be able to get more detail into it. Right, so I think what I do here is I start off with my cutoff tool, and I start off with a rectangular sort of marquee selection. I'm just going to start chopping bits off of this so that it's not so perfectly boxy. And it's got some of that kind of nice, sort of faceted, rocky, sort of kind of feel to it. And, you know, I've got some reference off screen, and also I've done this over and over and over the Christmas break so that I roughly know what I'm doing at the moment. Now I'm going to turn to the polygonal selection tool. So that'll allow me to not cut off rectangular bits, but sort of define sort of polygonal shapes that I can cut off. Now remember, it's cutting off depending on the view angle, and it's slicing all the way through. Now I'm going to go back to the rectangular marquee selection and chop off the bottom as well. Now when I cut off bits, I'm kind of permanently cutting them off. In a moment, I'm going to be using another tool called the Vox Hide, which superficially does the same thing as the cutoff tool, but has added power that it's not completely deleting it forever. It's simply hiding parts of the voxel mesh or voxel kind of object, and then it will allow me to selectively bring back parts of the mesh. It's a very, very powerful tool to use. And you'll see why in a bit. So I'm doing some more cutting here, just kind of trying to get some interesting looking kind of shapes. So yeah, now I'm going to go to the Vox Hide tool. So to begin with, I will use the rectangular selection. It's going to look like it's doing exactly the same thing. It's just hidden it. But with the Vox Hide tool, I can hold down Control, and if I hold down Control, oh, by the way, I'm going to go to the orthogonal view now. If I hold down Control, and now I'm using the freehand selection, it's actually going to bring back some of what I hid with that initial Vox Hide. And this is the general gist of everything, really, in 3D Coat. And it's very similar to Blender sculpting and ZBrush sculpting as well, in that Control will invert whatever the tool is doing. So if you were sculpting with like a clay brush, by default you would add to it, but if you held down Control, it would actually eat into the mesh. Exactly the same with Vox Hide. If I don't hold down Control, it will hide it, but if I do hold down Control, it'll bring some of it back. And I'm using the freehand the freehand sort of tool option here, and I'm kind of grazing at the edges of the objects, and it has a very nice kind of chipped off kind of feel, and I never have to worry about polygons or anything like that underneath it, because this is treating 3D Coat in voxel sculpting mode treats the object like a big chunk of clay, so I can just slice into it with abandon. So I'm hiding parts with Vox Hide, and then I'm every now and again holding down Control and bringing parts of it back again. So again, just trying to create some interesting chipped off rocky kind of feels to the object. Mostly just trying to take the two perfect edges off of the original block out. Now, I'm trying to do this so that you don't get too bored, and so I tried to do the whole thing in about 15 minutes. You should ideally be spending a fair bit extra, and it probably will take you much longer on your first go because you haven't used this software before. Anyway, now I'm going to go to Split Tool. So I'm going to go to the Split Tool. I'm going to change this setting up here to 0. And it's quite important, otherwise it won't work. And I'm going to go to the Polygonal Tool. Now what Split Tool is going to do is, well, as the name suggests, it's going to split the object into different parts. And you define the area you want to split off. And you'll see that it's creating a new voxel layer each time that I do it. And that split tool is again dependent on the view that you're looking at the object, and will slice completely through the object. Split tool is really, really useful because I'm going to then go back to the Vox Hide tool, and I'll be able to make more little sort of chips where these sort of parts meet. I'm going to right mouse button click and go to the shader, apply to subtree. So that will then apply that shader to all those other bits. And as you select each member of the subtree, you'll see that it kind of flashes. Now what you don't see is by default, it'll be set to auto pick, which is at the top. And I'll flash that up just now. And if I switch that off, then I get to choose what part of the object that I'm going to then be working on. So I've gone back to the Vox Hide tool, and I've selected the top layer, the top Vox layer, and I'm kind of going around and I'm freehand chipping away at bits. And now then I can create this nice rocky feel where you can kind of see like cracks and the strata of the rock, I guess you would call it. But now I can kind of create little sort of, little bits that chip away where two kind of layers meet. Now, the Vox Hide tool, sorry, if I can get my words out, will go completely through the mesh. So sometimes it can catch you out and you think that you're just chipping away at one part of the object, but then when you go around the back side of it, like I've realized just there, it's gone all the way through. So I just hold Control and I bring it back again. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error for you to figure out how this works. I'm going to select other parts of the object that I split off, and I'm going to sort of hide bits of that too. When I initially split the object, I used the polygonal tool the polygonal option of the tool to split the objects. So it's creating extremely sharp kind of transitions. I'm going to change that now by going to the Move tool and then selecting an alpha. Now, to increase the alpha, brush size of this tool, I hold Control, right mouse button sideways to increase the size of the tool. And I'm also going to select through all volumes, so I don't have to select each individual Vox layer separately. It will just go through all the volumes. And with that alpha, I can sort of add some rocky texture. It's going to add rocky texture, but it's also going to take those sort of very, very precise splits that I did, and it's going to kind of wriggle them up a little bit, make them look a little bit more natural. I'll also use Control right mouse button up and down to control the intensity of the tool. So control right mouse button left and right or sideways controls the size of the brush, because you can have brushes as well as rectangles and polygonals and freehand lassos. You can also have brushes as well. So now I'm going to go to the flat polish tool, and I'm going to select to make sure I've got another alpha selected. Now the flat polish tool is a great tool. It's a little bit like a scrape tool, except it's a little bit more flexible than the scrape tool, which there is one as well. So I can adjust the size of it. Now I can chisel and flatten off and polish some of these edges where I want them to be in a very kind of brushy kind of way. And similar to the any tool, if I held down control, instead of scraping away, it will actually add stuff to the mesh rather than scrape away at it, which again can be good to sort of add detail to where the two bits of rocks connect, and you don't necessarily want right angles. And I found that the flat polish tool is super useful for doing these kind of rocks. Again, notice I'm never worrying about wireframes or polygon counts or anything like that, or topology. All I'm worrying about here is just artistically chiseling away at the object to make it look kind of rocky. And one of the things that might catch you out when you haven't got auto pick selected, you have to constantly sort of remember, oh, what layer am I actually sort of applying this polish to? Because if I forget, it sometimes can feel like my polish isn't doing anything, and that's only just because, I haven't got the right Vox layer selected. See here, that move, when it was set to through all volumes, it can have a little bit of a unexpected side effect and create little sort of star patterns. But so I'm just going to use the polish tool to kind of chisel away at that and get rid of that sort of texture that I don't want. And again, as I mentioned, ideally you would spend more than 15 minutes kind of trying to make this look good. And you have some nice reference, and you would just take your time. And I think if you take your time after a while, you'll find it's quite a sort of almost Zen-like, relaxing kind of thing to do, to sculpt rocks. So again, I'm holding down control, and now I'm adding sort of volume between between two parts of the object. Now I think in a moment now I'm going to go back to the root of the Vox tree here. I'm going to right mouse button click and go merge subtree. This is a bit like Photoshop, it's a bit like flatten layers. It's going to take all those splits and those different objects that I created with the split and make it one object again. Now I'm going to go back to move, choose a different alpha, which is kind of like a cracky kind of alpha. Turn off through all volumes, because I've only got one object now. I haven't got multiple layers. I'm going to add some more kind of texture to this. It could be a little bit too easy to go overboard and add too much of this and to go over the top. You don't want to do that. You want to remember big, medium and small, clustering of details. Don't put a ton of detail absolutely everywhere. And back to perspective view to have a quick check, and yeah, it's looking not too shabby for 15 minutes.